All right, everybody. It's Christmas Eve, otherwise known as December 22nd. And today, we are going to be tasting the last bourbon of the Whiskey Advent Calendar. This brand distillery is special to me because not the specific bottle, but another one in the core line of this brand was gifted to me, and it really sparked my interest in bourbon. When I really got into whiskey, it was via Scotch. I dove deep into Scotch, but you can only dive so deep when you're not working with a big budget because it's so expensive. And then I had a bottle of this distillery gifted to me, and it really got me into bourbon and sent me down this journey. And like George Remus and MGP, it's what I would call a mainstay, like an industry giant of bourbon that I had never heard of before I really got into it. So, without further ado, we are talking about Four Roses. And we're going to be tasting the Four Roses single barrel. So a lot of the bourbons that we've tasted in particular, well, a lot of the whiskeys, but particularly the bourbons, we've tasted their, if not their bottom shelf, they're one of their entry level bourbons. Four Roses has a similar bottom shelf sort of whiskey that probably isn't worth bothering with. It's just Four Roses. Pretty generic looking bottle, generic looking label with Four Roses on it. But their core product line, there are four of them. Each one is one of the Four Roses is how they branded it. So you have Four Roses, which I guess I'll just call standard. Then there's Four Roses small batch. And then we have Four Roses single barrel. So obviously this is from a single barrel. It's 50% alcohol. 100 proof. The main reason that I really like Four Roses as a distillery and as a company is they do some really cool creative stuff. They do a lot of different things. They're almost like the opposite of Maker's Mark. So remember Maker's Mark, they have this one mash bill and one spirit and aged bourbon that they start with, and then they make everything from that. Four Roses does it completely differently. I'm going to pour a little bit of it, and then I'll explain how they do it so differently. Four Roses, unlike Maker's Mark, for example, has 10 different bourbon recipes that they make and sometimes blend and sometimes just bottle all the time. And they code them in a really weird way, so you know what you're drinking. A really weird way. So it's I'll try not to get too deep into it, but it's a 4-letter code where the first letter and the third letter are always the same. They almost don't matter. So the first letter is always an O, which I believe stands for, it's for the distillery, and I think Four Roses used to be called Old Prentice. So I think the O's for that, but I've not heard that anywhere. I've just kind of surmised that. So they all start with an O. The next letter is always an E or a B. E represents the low rye bourbon mash bill, and B represents the high rye bourbon mash bill. So we always have an O, then we have an E or a B. And the third letter is always an S, which just stands for straight bourbon, because all the recipes produce straight bourbon. So we have O, then E or B, then S, and then the final letter. There are 5 of them, and it's because they have 5 different yeast strains that they use to ferment the grain into alcohol. The letters they use to code those are V, K, O, Q, and F. And the Four Roses single barrel, it's a single barrel, so it's one of those recipes aged in a barrel, I think for a minimum of 7 to 9 years, depending on the barrel. And the specific recipe for this one is OBSV. So B means it's one of the high rye mash bills, and then V is that particular yeast strain. And, well, spoiler alert, I've got another Four Roses. And this one gives me a little booklet that tells the specific flavors you're supposed to get from that. So this is an OBSV. And supposedly we're going to get delicate fruity, like pear or apricot, spicy and creamy. Okay, let's put that to the test. See what we get here. I get baking spices and caramel. The first things that I smell really strongly. Maybe it's because we haven't had a bourbon in a couple days, but this is just smelling like a lot more like a classic bourbon profile than I expected. A hint toward like a floraliness, but I may be biased just because I know Four Roses. It's almost a little too on the nose that Four Roses would be a little bit floral, but it really is. And one thing about Four Roses that I've always thought was interesting is typically for me when I'm doing blinds, they perform very poorly because they stick out like a sore thumb as just being different. Like it has almost like, oh, this is a weird funk to it compared to these other bourbons. But on their own, they blow so much out of the water. They're so good. Yeah, I'm getting a spiciness to it. It's just like a spicy caramel. It's good. Let's give it a taste. Oh wow, that rye spice is doing a lot of work. It's almost like it has this base of like sweet corn, bourbon, caramely maybe on the palate, but it's really covered up in almost like that's just like the foundation, kind of like presenting you with these rye spices. Just like strong baking spice that then develops like almost immediately into like a touch toward minty, like kind of like Barton, but without that. So it reminds me of like the 1792, but instead of having, a sweetness and a mintiness that kind of veers toward a sweet, like bubblegummy flavor at some point, this is almost like it's like a sweetness that goes toward baking spice and then toward that mintiness a little bit. It's really good. And on the finish and then the back palate, I'm getting that like really strong like herbal flavor, which is good. But it just reminds me of why this always sticks out when I taste it in a blind, because that is just so different than any other bourbon I've had. If you're picking up on that, like especially if you've saved a few of these and you're having, a couple in one day and then you're trying this one, after having already had one or two. So if you're picking up on that almost weird like herbalness coming up in the back palate or the back of your throat, or the front of your throat rather, that characteristic isn't just unique to this bottle, that's unique to this distillery. At least the different Four Roses products that I've had have all had that sort of herbalness to them, which again can be off-putting if you're doing this one back to back with others, but on its own I think is really pleasant. I like it quite a bit. Man, I can't get enough of this nose. That's tasty. So I like that a lot. That herbal, minty, baking spice all together, that's what made this like more of like a Christmassy bourbon to me. Like when I'm thinking Christmas and holidays, bourbon is not my go-to spirit for this time of year, even though I love bourbon. I don't think a lot of bourbons are very Christmassy, but this one gets there, I think. Maybe just barely, but I do think it gets there. I like it an awful lot. If you do like this, keep an eye out for the barrel proof version. The store picks for Four Roses, you can't get a store pick of any bottle other than the single barrel. And what the store pick is, it's a specific one of these 10 recipes. And if the store managers or whoever are going to pick them out, you know, they're going to have their, I don't know if they tell them the recipe ahead of time. I assume they would, because the recipes are such a big deal with Four Roses. But then they taste these barrels to see which one that they like as well. So this one right here, this is, what is it? It was from Met Market, and they tell you, it's kind of cool. So the way they do the store pick is they have these stickers on the side, and I think they usually, if not always, let me see if I can get this focused right, will tell you the recipe as well. So this is an OBSF. So this is also a high rye, but with the F yeast instead of the V yeast. And, you know, I can tell you without tasting the difference that it makes is it makes this one like a mint bomb. Like when I first opened this, you know, the neck pour especially, and I hated it. Was very upset because I think this was like 80 something bucks before tax. And I was so excited because I'd never seen one at the time before, and I knew there were 10 and I wanted to try them all. I was like, Pokemon, cool, great, whatever. And then I had it and was like, oh man, like I really hope this ages better. And it did. Like the mintiness is like calmed down quite a bit where it's not toothpastey. And I guess my point is like, it's crazy to me that Four Roses can make such wildly different whiskeys that still have like a through point, like something that's consistent between them. And that's why I think it's always a good idea to buy one of these. If you find a single barrel strength, and I mean, hopefully this focuses and I can show you, but like this is a single barrel, this is single barrel strength, and it says that right up front. If I see one of these again, I absolutely will pull the trigger. I'm still looking, really excited to try this stuff. This is about 50 bucks, give or take, the standard single barrel. I think it's definitely worth it after having it here. This one, again, 80 plus. Depends what recipe you get and your palate. Like I said, it's hard for me to recommend any specific recipe because there are so many and palates are so different. It's just hard to say. I really did like, though, the small batch select. If you're willing to spend between like 60-ish before tax, I would definitely recommend the Four Roses small batch select. But otherwise, this is generally, you know, among the community of the bourbon geeks, recognized as being kind of the sweet spot of value to taste. That's why I got it for this, even though it's not their entry level by any means. I thought it'd be the best representation, and I think it probably is. So I hope you enjoyed it. I definitely did. Happy to answer any questions you have about other Four Roses single barrels. If you see any, let me know, because I'm on the lookout for them. I'm going to try more, and I'm excited to. All right, getting closer to Christmas. We've got 2 more left. Excited, scared, sad, but mainly excited. So cheers. I'll see you tomorrow.